Hello, Peter. Can you tell us what this video is about, please?
Hi, Leo. Thanks. Yes, it's about the supporting document that needs to be supplied if you're applying to the Heritage Emergency Fund for more than £10,000. If you've not already watched the other video, which gives general guidance on the grant scheme, then take a look at that first.
Great. Thank you. The purpose of the cash flow forecast.
It's something that most organisations need right now due to the emergency situation that we're in. And providing the Heritage Fund with your forecast will help it understand the pressures you're under and where else you're expecting to get funding from in this current situation. So it'll be used by the decision makers to inform their view of the priority for funding that the individual cases demonstrate in this crisis period.
Excellent, thank you. And do applicants need to use a specific template for their cash flow forecast?
No, they can use whatever they have to hand or create for the purposes of supporting the grant application. What I'm going to do is talk through a typical example that I think you can see on the screen that applicants can use as a prompt where appropriate, but organisations are free to use whatever format they wish, as long as they've covered the essential points that I'm going to run through now.
Okay, fantastic. Can you take us through the example then?
Yeah, okay. So obviously there are lots of unknowns for everybody right now. So it's completely understood that making a cash flow forecast is difficult. But what this example does is to indicate, as you can see, the month through from April to August, as it stands at the moment, and that's on the assumption that many applicants will be making their request for funding in the next few weeks. As the guidelines say, you can apply for funding for up to a 4-month period. So just in terms of this note at the top of the spreadsheet, if you have a trading subsidiary, please prepare a consolidated cash flow for both the parent organisation and the subsidiary. So pull it together as one cash flow. And it'd be handy if you could number the rows, each row, up and down, and then provide assumption notes either alongside, I've got my notes here to the right, or underneath the table, whichever kind of works best for you. So I'm going to take you through the key rows here where I've got notes to the right-hand side of the key rows. So the first thing is to, up at the top here, is to insert in this box here your opening bank balance at the date where effectively you're starting your cash flow. And in terms of that, in inverted commas, bank balance, include reserves that you can draw upon during this emergency period. So it may be a combination of money that's sitting in kind of your general account and possibly another account. There's more in the other video about principles of reserves, and it'll answer some questions if you fill the application form in. Excuse me, about the approach to reserves that you can take. So having input that figure, then the first thing to do then is to look at monthly cash inflows. So that's income coming into you. And I've divided this into two parts. Firstly, what I call regular income, part A, and then a bit further down, part B, emergency grants and income. And the reason for distinguishing between the two is, in a sense, is the first part is for you to put in the income that you're expecting to get from your, in inverted commas, general operations, regular operations over the next few months. And the second part B there, is for income you're expecting which wholly arises from the coronavirus pandemic, and which is, in a sense, is related to individual grant schemes, potentially including the Heritage Emergency Fund in that context. So just running through on the part A, regular income. The first category here that I've put up, again, you don't have to use exactly the same words. It's whatever you use generally, as long as it's clear to the decision makers what you're meaning. So for trading income, clearly at the moment, many organisations have almost none or no trading income. But there could be some that have some non-public facing trading income. For example, if you were doing online sales or some type of consultancy or other activities, digital activities. So please explain what assumptions you're making. And here also, if I just scroll back up to the top of the spreadsheet, given that this is going through until August, you can make an assumption at the moment because obviously we're all in lockdown. But again, there are judgments to be made, and no one of us is in a good place to make these judgments, obviously, about when things could change. So we'll talk a bit more going through the spreadsheet about that situation, because clearly the further across those months you start to make forecasts, the more difficult it is because of those uncertainties. But all we're asking is that you make the assumptions that you feel are appropriate and indicate in the notes why you're making those assumptions. We can't ask for more than that. Nobody can. So the next row down is investment income. It's accepted here. It won't apply to most organisations. Probably relatively few who are applying for this funding will have investments upon which they're getting income. But if you are, then obviously it is income that's happening. So pop that in there. The next one down is regular revenue funding grants. Again, probably applies to only relatively small proportion of organisations who are looking for funding from the Heritage Fund now. But if, for example, you get a revenue grant year by year or over a period of years from a local authority, or, for example, say if you were in England and were a museum and were getting funding from the Arts Council as a revenue grant, or within the devolved government some equivalent funding, and that's supporting your core running costs, then you should show it here so that we have a sense of what that funding may be. There are guidance notes about which is the most appropriate funding body to go to if you're also getting money from other lottery distributors. So look at the guidance notes about that as well, and there's some comments about that in the other video. The next one down is project grants. So many organisations have funding that is specifically earmarked, reserved, restricted for individual projects. It could be an activities project, it could be a capital project, and it's just making sure here that that's shown separately if that's a project that is still running during this emergency period. So indicate the income you're getting in from that over this period, if there is any. Bank interest, well, generally speaking, that's pretty modest, if anything. So I don't think we need to linger on that. And then I've got a sort of catch-all at the end, which is other, which is any other, in inverted commas, normal, regular income not covered by the above. You can obviously divide this up in any way that works for you and in terms of the way that you normally do your forecasts and cash flows. But if you can cover where appropriate those headings, then hopefully that will make sense and be helpful for the decision makers. So now I'm going to go on to part B, emergency grants, etc. income. So this list is an excuse me is an EG, because then it's really just a prompt. Now the first one here is the UK government's job retention scheme, furlough as it's known. And there could be quite a number of you who already are working on the basis, or indeed are in the process of applying for that for members of staff. So this is the place if you are expecting to be in receipt of that over this initial period that starts on the 1st of March and runs to the end of May. So that's actually the second column in this spreadsheet. Then put in what those that estimated income. It then raises the issue, well, what about June, July and August across the spreadsheet here? And whilst obviously if things remain very restricted beyond the end of May, I guess we're all working on the assumption that the government may extend the scheme, but at the moment, as we all know from the news, that's not a decision that's been taken. So all we can ask you here is you either you put nothing because you're assuming there's nothing, or if you are assuming that that scheme continues, then just explain what your assumptions are. There's obviously no right or wrong way of doing this, but the more prudent thing to do at this stage would be to assume there isn't any further funding because it hasn't been announced yet. The next row down is a catch-all for kind of all other COVID-19 related emergency funding from public sources. So various schemes that UK government or the devolved governments are running, including here on the right, schemes for small business rate relief, etc., other grants for small businesses depending on their rateable value. Of course, the vast majority of applicants to this scheme are going to be charities or CIOs. They may get they may get either 80% rate relief or 100% rate relief. The information about who potentially is eligible, notwithstanding, seems to be a bit mixed. But if those are schemes that you're expecting to get grants from, then include them here. And there may be other various local authorities are introducing their own specific schemes for different types of businesses. Maybe you're eligible for one of those, so that's the place to put those in if you've reasonable certainty that you're in line for that kind of funding. The next one down probably may not even apply to anybody, but just for completeness, there's been a lot of talk about insurance. It looks as if, I mean, the vast majority of organisations don't have cover that covers for pandemics, and very few that may possibly, I think, will like to get a payout, but it's there just in case you're in that category. So then we move on here to the final three. There are some charities, charitable funders, who are kind of reprioritising their grant schemes. Possible you might be in a category where you could apply to one of those grant schemes. Clearly, over this time scale, April, May, June, July, August, pretty short term. Therefore, you might not know whether you've got any grant in that period. If that's the case and there's no certainty whatsoever, then that's not a reasonable assumption to make that you would get it. But you could, in your notes here, say we've made an application, we're not sure about it, we don't think we're going to know for 3 months. We've applied for £10,000, but we haven't indicated it as a figure because we don't have much certainty about it at the moment. There's then a final category just before we get to Heritage Emergency Grant, the last row, for other fundraising, appeals, etc. Some organisations have already launched emergency appeals to their membership, to the wider community, to those that they can reach out to. And again, if you've a reasonable assumption that you're going to draw in money from those sources, then in this timescale, then indicate it there. And then the final row here is to indicate the grant that you've put on the application form for the Heritage Emergency Grant. So that can be for a maximum of 4 months across this period, depending on when you're applying, and obviously the total across the rows should come to the total that's shown on the application form. So make sure it lines up with that. So that then takes us on to monthly cash outflow, so your expenditure. And the first row here is obviously at any point in time with a cash flow, you may have bills that are sitting ready to be paid that haven't been paid, and that some of the cash up here in your opening bank balance is going to need to be spent to pay those off. So that's why that's in here, because at any point in time you're going to have bills that you haven't paid. The next one down is payroll costs, and here obviously you're putting in the payroll costs that you're expecting to pay out if you are in a position where you're going to be claiming job retention scheme. That's income that's coming in which partly offsets those costs. So again, help the decision makers to explain the assumptions you're making here. And again, because the furlough scheme at the moment only goes to April and May, difficult, we appreciate, to make assumptions for June, July and August. You may have to be working on the assumption that your payroll costs continue at the same level. There could be variances there. If they're significant, just indicate in the notes what the assumptions are that you've made. We're not holding you to them. We know this is extremely difficult to make these forecasts. Then the next row down is for national insurance, PAYE payments, the payments that if you're an employer, you make to HMRC monthly, or maybe made through an agent scheme. There could be some elements of this that are deferred, so the payments might not be quite at the normal level, although you've got to catch up further down the line. So again, just indicate what the assumptions are that you're making. Again, for pension payments, employers' pension payments or payments you're making on behalf of employees, if they're running on as they have done or in any revised form, then if applicable, put those in. You'll then have a series of kind of regular direct debits, DDs, and SO standing orders, so things that you're paying out every month. Utilities, insurance, if you pay that monthly or quarterly, good examples, but there may be others for lease payments on equipment or machinery or whatever. So that's the kind of ones that are just going out every month. And then you've got the last sort of category of general expenditure, which is day-to-day supplier payments, where you're getting those in from invoices and then you're paying them in the appropriate time scale. So obviously from your normal budget or your reduced scale budget you're working on at the moment, an estimate of what those are going to be during this period. The next category is project costs, and that in a sense is a mirror, if we go back up, to project grants on the income side. So this is the expenditure you're incurring on one-off projects. So they're not part of your routine expenditure, but if they're projects that are continuing during this period, then obviously you've got outgoings associated with them. So indicate there, and again, drop in a note to explain what that relates to. Bank charges, you could be just incurring bank charges in the normal course of events. And finally, I haven't got into any detail on this spreadsheet about that liability because circumstances change, but there may be VAT payments that are going out if you're VAT registered, depending on that situation. Also, it's understood that there may be some deferring of that liability, so it may be that there isn't any VAT going out in this period. So again, you can indicate what the situation is as it applies to you. And then finally, in the spreadsheet, this row is a total set of a total of expenditure. Popping back up again, there's a similar total on income here, and then right down at the very bottom, obviously, is taking one from the other, which is the monthly difference between the income coming in and the cash going out in this row here, and then picking up the cumulative cash position month by month, which obviously in that first month picks up what's in this cell here in terms of the cash you've got available, and then each month adjusts it depending on what the situation is here. So that then gives a good feel at the bottom here, based on the assumptions that you've made in good faith, as to how the world will look for you financially, and also will help the decision makers when they're looking at this row here for the Heritage Emergency Grant, and looking above that at what, if any, potential other emergency grants fundraising that you're able to pursue. And again, there are questions on the application form you will have answered about that, to get a sense of the priority of your particular case for the money that you're asking for from the Heritage Fund. So that's a walkthrough of that example spreadsheet. I say you can do it as you wish, but if you can pick up those essential headings and do something broadly in that format, hopefully it won't take you much time to do. You've probably already done some of these anyway to support your management as an organisation at the moment. Probably you'll be doing various scenarios because of some of the things we've talked about, because of those uncertainties. When might the lockdown end? Might it be a partial easing? What point might that be? Might the furlough scheme be extended? Obviously, you could run a series of those types of scenarios, including, will we get a grant from our local authority that we've applied for, or will we get small business rate relief, etc., etc. We're just asking you to keep it simple for, if you like, your one single spreadsheet that makes a set of reasonable assumptions and with notes that you've explained to us why you've made those assumptions. But if you want in a separate sort of set of notes at the bottom to just indicate the other scenarios that you're looking at as well, don't do more spreadsheets, but if you want to add any extra notes, again, that may help the decision makers to understand the kind of the thought process that you're going through as you're working your way through the emergency and as you're working up your case for this emergency grant. So I think that probably covers everything. I'll just make reinforce a final point that you're not going to be held to the assumptions you're making here. It's a forecast. It's accepted they're being made in good faith at the time you're making the application, and they could be subject to change. And clearly, that's fully understood. It's your best set of assumptions at the point that you're making the application, whether that's immediately or a little bit further down the track. So I hope that's been useful. And once again, to all of you, take care, stay safe. Thanks.